The morning mist hung heavy over the Rocky Mountain foothills when an injured bobcat did something that would rewrite everything wildlife experts thought they knew about fear, trust, and the invisible bonds between broken souls. For 6 hours, this wild predator had held an entire rescue team at bay, refusing help from anyone who approached, until one quiet veteran with haunted eyes stepped forward and changed everything. Dawn broke cold and gray across the Colorado Wilderness Preserve, casting long shadows through towering ponderosa pines. The silence of the mountain forest was broken only by the distant call of a red-tailed hawk and the soft crunch of frost-covered pine needles under boots. At the edge of a steep ravine, where ancient granite boulders jutted from the earth like sleeping giants, an unprecedented scene was unfolding that would challenge every assumption about wild animal behavior. Sarah Chen, a wildlife biologist with 15 years of experience, crouched behind a fallen log, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp mountain air. Through her binoculars, she watched the most perplexing situation of her career. A fully grown bobcat, its tawny coat marked with distinctive dark spots, lay trapped beneath a massive fallen branch near the ravine's edge. The powerful predator's left front paw was clearly mangled, twisted at an unnatural angle that spoke of hours of desperate struggle. What made this scene extraordinary wasn't just the bobcat's predicament, but its reaction to human presence. Every attempt at rescue had been met with fierce resistance. The animal's yellow-green eyes burned with a mixture of pain and defiance, its ears flattened against its broad skull. Low growls rumbled from its throat whenever anyone approached within 20 feet. This wasn't typical defensive behavior. This was something deeper, more complex. Dr. Marcus Webb had already made 3 careful approaches, each ending with the bobcat's explosive snarls and attempts to drag itself further away despite its obvious agony. The tranquilizer dart lay unused in his kit. At this distance, in the bobcat's current state of heightened stress, sedation carried too many risks. The rescue team had been here since before sunrise, watching, planning, growing increasingly concerned as precious time slipped away. The bobcat's breathing had grown more labored, its movements weaker. Something had to change soon, or they would lose this magnificent creature to injuries that were entirely treatable, if only they could get close enough to help. Among the assembled rescue team stood Tom Hartwell, a man whose presence seemed to occupy less space than his actual physical form suggested. At 52, the former Army medic possessed the kind of quiet intensity that comes from years of moving through dangerous places where noise meant death. His weathered hands bore the scars of 2 tours in Afghanistan, and his dark eyes held the particular stillness that belonged to those who had seen too much and learned to carry it in silence. Tom worked as a groundskeeper for the Colorado Mountain Wildlife Preserve, a job he'd taken 3 years ago after retiring from military service. He preferred the company of trees to people, finding solace in the predictable rhythms of forest maintenance. Most days, he could go hours without speaking to another human being, communicating instead with the whisper of wind through pine boughs and the distant calls of wildlife that had learned to trust his careful, unobtrusive presence. Sarah Chen had worked with dozens of wildlife experts over her career, but she'd never encountered anyone quite like Tom. He seemed to understand animal behavior on an intuitive level that couldn't be taught in any university program. She'd watched him calm aggressive elk during relocation efforts, his mere presence somehow communicating safety to creatures that viewed all other humans as threats. The animals sensed something in him that others missed, a deep respect for their wildness combined with an understanding of what it meant to be wounded. Dr. Marcus Webb had initially been skeptical of Tom's unconventional methods, but results spoke louder than credentials. The quiet veteran had assisted in 17 successful wildlife rescues over the past 2 years, often serving as the crucial bridge between human intention and animal acceptance. He never pushed, never forced, never raised his voice. He simply existed in their space until trust became possible. Standing 30 feet from the trapped bobcat, Tom studied the situation with the same methodical assessment he'd once used to evaluate combat zones. He noticed things others missed: precise angle of the animal's ears, the rhythm of its breathing, the way its good paw flexed against the rocky ground. These details painted a picture that went beyond physical injury into the complex territory of psychological trauma. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the mist and revealing the full scope of the challenge ahead. 3 wildlife experts, 2 veterinarian assistants, and 1 park ranger surrounded a single wounded predator that refused all offers of salvation. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. As the rescue team positioned themselves for a closer assessment, the true extent of the bobcat's crisis became devastatingly clear. Chan Webb adjusted his telephoto lens, capturing detailed images that revealed injuries far more severe than a simple trapped paw. The animal's left shoulder showed signs of significant trauma, with matted fur indicating internal bleeding. Dark stains marked the granite beneath the bobcat, evidence of hours spent struggling against its wooden prison. Sarah Chan's trained eye caught additional warning signs that painted an increasingly grim picture. The bobcat's gums appeared pale when it opened its mouth to snarl, suggesting blood loss and possible shock. Its powerful hindquarters, normally coiled with explosive energy, lay unnaturally still. Most concerning was the animal's labored breathing pattern, shallow, rapid breaths that indicated either lung damage or severe pain compromising its respiratory system. Through her field scope, Chan observed behavioral indicators that worried her more than the visible wounds. Wild bobcats possessed legendary pain tolerance, often traveling miles with injuries that would incapacitate domestic cats. This animal's obvious distress suggested trauma beyond what they could see from their vantage point. The way it guarded its left side indicated possible rib fractures, while its reluctance to shift positions hinted at spinal involvement. The fallen branch itself presented a complex engineering challenge. Measuring nearly 3 feet in diameter and at least 12 feet long, the massive ponderosa pine limb had likely crashed down during the previous night's windstorm. Its weight pressed against the bobcat's midsection, creating a crushing force that grew more dangerous with each passing hour. The animal's attempts to dig free had only wedged it deeper into the rocky crevice. Dr. Webb calculated the grim mathematics of wildlife trauma. Every hour of compression increased the risk of permanent nerve damage. Every minute of stress elevated the bobcat's heart rate, accelerating blood loss and depleting its already compromised energy reserves. The cold mountain air, while helping to slow bleeding, also posed hypothermia risks for an animal unable to regulate its body temperature through normal movement. Time was becoming the enemy. The morning shadows were shortening, indicating the approach of midday heat that would add dehydration to their growing list of concerns. This magnificent predator, evolved to survive in harsh wilderness conditions, was failing not from any natural challenge, but from a simple accident of physics and timing. What happened next defied every principle of wild animal behavior documented in scientific literature. Instead of the expected fight-or-flight response that defined bobcat interactions with humans, this trapped predator began exhibiting something unprecedented: selective aggression based on individual human presence. When Dr. Webb stepped forward with his medical kit, the bobcat's response was explosive, eyes blazing with territorial fury. When Sarah Chan attempted a flanking approach from the east side, snarls erupted that could be heard echoing off the canyon walls. But when Tom Hartwell simply sat down on a boulder 15 feet away and remained motionless, the bobcat's reaction shifted dramatically. The constant low growling ceased. Its flattened ears slowly rose to a neutral position.
Most remarkably, the animal's fierce yellow-green gaze locked onto Tom's face and held there, not with the aggressive stare of a cornered predator, but with something resembling cautious evaluation. This behavioral anomaly sent ripples of confusion through the rescue team. Bobcats were solitary creatures that avoided human contact at all costs. Injured wild animals typically became more aggressive, not more discriminating. The idea that a wounded predator could somehow distinguish between threatening and non-threatening human individuals challenged fundamental assumptions about wildlife psychology. Sarah Chen had studied thousands of hours of bobcat footage and never witnessed anything comparable. These animals possessed acute survival instincts that labeled all humans as
dangerous. Their response to human presence followed predictable patterns: immediate flight if escape routes existed, fierce defensive aggression when cornered. They didn't pause to assess individual humans for trustworthiness. They certainly didn't engage in prolonged eye contact that suggested conscious decision-making. Tom remained perfectly still, his breathing steady and controlled. The bobcat continued watching him with an intensity that seemed to transcend simple animal awareness. Minutes passed in this strange standoff while the rest of the team observed from their positions, afraid to move and break whatever fragile connection was forming. The veteran's military training had taught him to recognize when standard protocols failed and intuition became the only viable path forward. He understood that this moment balanced on an edge sharper than any battlefield decision he'd ever faced. One wrong move would shatter the unprecedented trust beginning to form between two wounded souls who had found recognition in each other's eyes. The Colorado wilderness had been under siege for 18 months, battered by a combination of climate pressures that were reshaping the delicate balance between human development and wildlife habitat. Extended drought had driven normally reclusive predators closer to populated areas in search of water sources, while unprecedented wildfire seasons had destroyed thousands of acres of traditional hunting grounds. The preserve where Tom worked served as one of the last sanctuary corridors connecting the isolated mountain habitats where bobcats could still survive. This particular stretch of forest held special significance for Tom's own journey toward healing. 3 years earlier, he'd arrived at the preserve carrying invisible wounds that VA hospitals couldn't touch. The nightmares from Kandahar province still visited him most nights. Images of fellow soldiers he couldn't save, decisions made in split seconds that haunted him for years. His transition to civilian life had been marked by failed relationships, job instability, and a growing sense of disconnection from a world that seemed impossibly fragile compared to the combat zones he'd known. Working among the ancient pines had become his therapy. The forest didn't judge his silences or demand explanations for the tremor in his hands during thunderstorms. Wildlife didn't ask about his service record or expect him to articulate trauma that existed beyond the reach of words. Here, among creatures that understood survival on instinct alone, Tom had slowly begun to rebuild something resembling peace. The drought had created a crisis that extended far beyond individual animal welfare. Wildlife corridors were collapsing as water sources vanished and prey animals migrated to areas with better resources. Predators like bobcats, already territorial and solitary by nature, found themselves squeezed into ever smaller pockets of viable habitat. Territorial conflicts increased, while human-wildlife encounters multiplied as desperate animals ventured into residential areas seeking food and water. For Tom, this bobcat represented something larger than a single rescue operation. Every animal they saved strengthened the genetic diversity necessary for long-term species survival in an rapidly changing ecosystem. But beyond the scientific imperative lay something more personal, a recognition that some battles could still be won, some broken things could still be healed if the right person stepped forward with patience and understanding instead of force. Dr. Webb faced a decision that could end his career or save a life, possibly both.
Standard wildlife rescue protocols existed for crucial reasons, protecting both animals and humans from unnecessary risks. Allowing an untrained civilian to approach a cornered predator violated every safety guideline he'd sworn to uphold as the preserve's chief veterinarian. Insurance policies, liability concerns, and professional ethics all pointed toward one conclusion: maintain the perimeter, use standard sedation procedures, accept the elevated risks. Yet the standard procedures weren't working. 3 hours had passed since the initial emergency call, and the bobcat's condition was visibly deteriorating. Each failed approach attempt had increased the animal's stress levels, making successful sedation even more dangerous. The tranquilizer dosage required for an animal in this heightened state of panic could easily prove fatal, especially given the unknown extent of internal injuries.
Sarah Chen found herself advocating for something that contradicted her scientific training. "Look at the behavioral data," she argued quietly to Dr. Webb, her field notebook filled with observations that made no conventional sense. "This animal is making conscious distinctions between team members. It's demonstrating cognitive flexibility that suggests higher-order thinking processes. Maybe we need to respond with equal flexibility." The park ranger, Mike Rodriguez, voiced the concerns that kept Webb awake at night. If something goes wrong, if Tom gets mauled trying this unconventional approach, we're all liable. The preserve could lose its operating license. Every animal sanctuary in the state would face increased restrictions. His words carried the weight of bureaucratic reality that could shut down decades of conservation work. Tom Hartwell remained seated on his boulder, seemingly unaware of the heated discussion taking place behind him. His focus stayed fixed on the trapped bobcat, which had now shifted to rest its chin on the rocky ground while maintaining eye contact. The animal's breathing had slowed, its aggressive posturing replaced with something resembling resigned patience. Dr. Webb realized this moment would define not just the outcome for one injured predator, but his entire philosophy of wildlife management. He could follow established protocols and likely watch the bobcat die from stress-induced cardiac arrest during sedation attempts. Or he could trust his gut and break every rule he'd been thought to follow. Dr. Webb made the decision that would haunt and vindicate him for years to come. "Tom," he called softly, "if you're going to try this, we do it properly. Sarah, get the emergency medical kit ready. Rodriguez, radio for helicopter evacuation standby, for both Tom and the bobcat." His voice carried the authority of someone crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Tom rose from the boulder with movements so deliberate they seemed choreographed. Each step toward the trapped bobcat was calculated, his body language broadcasting non-aggression through every subtle gesture. His hands remained visible and empty, arms loose at his sides. He breathed with the measured rhythm he'd learned during meditation sessions at the VA hospital, techniques designed to manage combat stress that now served an entirely different purpose. The bobcat watched his approach with eyes that reflected intelligence beyond simple animal instinct. When Tom reached the 10-foot mark, well within the predator's striking range, he slowly lowered himself to the ground, moving into a seated position that reduced his threatening profile. The bobcat's ears twitched forward, a subtle shift that Sarah Chen noted with trembling hands as she documented this unprecedented interaction. "Easy, friend," Tom whispered, his voice carrying the same gentle tone he'd once used to calm wounded soldiers during artillery bombardments. The bobcat's yellow-green gaze never wavered from his face, as if reading something in his expression that transcended species barriers. Tom inched closer, now within arm's reach of claws that could shred human flesh in seconds. The massive fallen branch lay between them like a wooden bridge neither could cross. He extended one scarred hand toward the space where the bobcat's good paw rested, not touching, simply offering the possibility of contact. What happened next would be replayed in wildlife journals and veteran therapy programs for decades. The bobcat, this apex predator that had rejected all human assistance, slowly extended its uninjured paw until it made gentle contact with Tom's weathered fingertips. The touch lasted only seconds, but in that moment, two creatures who understood survival, trauma, and the desperate need for trust found recognition in each other. The moment of contact transformed everything. The bobcat's entire body relaxed in a way that defied biological explanation, muscles releasing tension that had been building for hours. Its breathing shifted from rapid, shallow pants to deeper, more controlled inhalations. The constant vigilance in its eyes softened, replaced by something approaching relief. Tom felt the animal's pulse through the brief touch, still elevated, but no longer racing with panic-driven intensity. Working with movements so gradual they appeared almost motionless, Tom began examining the fallen branch that held the bobcat prisoner. His combat engineering experience revealed leverage points that the wildlife experts had missed. The massive limb wasn't simply pressing down. It had created a complex trap where the bobcat's struggles had wedged smaller branches into an interlocking puzzle of wood and stone. "I need rope and a come-along winch," Tom called softly to the team, without breaking eye contact with the bobcat, and three people positioned at precise angles. His voice carried the calm authority of someone who had orchestrated rescues under enemy fire, transforming chaos into coordinated action through pure force of will.
Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Dr. Webb approached with his medical bag, moving with the same deliberate pace Tom had demonstrated. The bobcat's reaction was telling. Instead of renewed aggression, it simply watched the veterinarian's approach with cautious acceptance. Tom's presence had somehow extended a protective aura that included the entire rescue operation. As the team positioned equipment around the trapped animal, the bobcat remained remarkably calm. It allowed Dr. Webb to assess its injuries from close range, even permitting gentle palpation of the injured shoulder. The preliminary examination revealed extensive soft tissue damage and probable fractures, but nothing that appeared immediately life-threatening if they could complete the extraction quickly. Sarah Chen documented behavior that would revolutionize understanding of trauma responses in wild predators. The bobcat had shifted from fight or flight panic into something resembling cooperative survival mode. It seemed to understand that these humans represented its best chance for survival, a cognitive leap that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal intelligence and adaptability. The winch engaged with a mechanical whir that should have triggered renewed panic, but the bobcat simply closed his eyes and waited for freedom. The extraction took 12 minutes of careful coordination, but when the final branch lifted free, the bobcat immediately tried to stand on 3 legs, its spirit unbroken despite the trauma. Dr. Webb's field surgery stabilized the fractures while Tom maintained his calming presence throughout the procedure. The animal never once tried to bite or scratch, as if understanding that pain meant healing. 6 months later, the bobcat, now called Echo by the preserve staff, had made a complete recovery. But something remarkable had happened during his rehabilitation. Echo refused to leave the area around Tom's maintenance cabin, establishing territory that overlapped with human activity for the first time in documented Colorado bobcat history. He would appear at dawn when Tom began his daily rounds, following at a respectful distance, 2 survivors sharing the same path through the forest. Tom's transformation proved equally profound. The nightmares that had plagued him for years began fading, replaced by a sense of purpose he'd thought lost forever. He started leading wildlife rescue training sessions, teaching other veterans how to channel their unique understanding of trauma into healing work with animals. His methods, once considered dangerously unconventional, became standard protocol for the preserve's most challenging cases. The story of Tom and Echo spread through veteran networks and wildlife communities alike, proving that sometimes the most broken souls are uniquely qualified to heal each other. Their bond demonstrated that trust, once shattered, could be rebuilt through patience, understanding, and recognition of shared experience.
If this story of unexpected healing and connection moved you, there are countless other incredible tales of humans and wildlife finding hope together. Subscribe to our channel to discover more amazing stories of survival, second chances, and the remarkable bonds that form when two species choose trust over fear. Your subscription helps us share these powerful reminders that healing is always possible.